You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Hey, welcome back to 40 Fit Radio, and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. I'm here with Coach Trent.
That's me.
And Coach D. Well, that's me. And we're going to talk today about knee pain and strength training, or knee pain and fitness training, whatever you want to call it. Just knee pain in general. Oh, my knees hurt. Knee pain is probably one of the most common areas of complaints, not only in the gym, but also in the clinic. If I could put diagnosis ranked from most frequently seen to least frequently, I would say it's probably low back pain first, and then knee pain and shoulder pain probably rank second and third, and then we go down from there. You know, cervical pain, neck pain, hip pain, ankle pain, wrist pain.
I got pain in the brain.
Yeah, pain in the brain, pain in the membrane. Right? Isn't that a song? Yeah. Who sings that?
Insane in the Membrane.
Yeah.
That was Cypress Hill, right?
Oh, Insane in the Membrane.
Yeah.
I thought it was Pain in the Membrane.
I think it was Cypress Hill.
I'm so uncool, man. I'm so old.
Hey, again,
I am so old.
That's your era, man. That's like
I know,
Beastie Boys.
man. Insane in the Membrane. Yeah, that's a great song. I got that on. Hey, I have that on Spotify. Okay, dude?
Yeah, that's cool.
I have Beastie Boys on Spotify.
I just found this great
Trent.
funk band. So,
with an N, not a C.
That's right. Although the genre, lends itself. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, anyway, they're called Mandrill.
Mandrill.
Yeah,
okay.
Great old funk band from the 70s.
Huh.
I'd never heard of them before, but it's just good, chill. It's got some stank on it.
There's a lot of good 70s rock bands, a lot of good 70s music, everything from soft rock to just good rock, man, and great R&B. 70s is awesome. I grew up actually listening more to the 70s in my impressionable years because I was into my teens in the late 70s. And so my parents were listening to that music on vinyls or on 8-tracks or on our radio, our stereo player in our living room.
Right.
So,
well, it's funny. A lot of that stuff got remastered in the 90s when in the CD era as it changed over from vinyl to CD.
They improved the quality of it.
And, and some of it just wasn't available.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite bands from that era, from the 70s, was a band called Big Star. Mm-hmm. And nobody knows who they are, very few people. And they had some bona fide hits. They were like this cool mix of like the Stones or the Beatles, somewhere in that sort of vein. They fit the time period perfectly, and they had great songs. But supposedly their record label completely screwed the pooch in terms of distribution. Like they couldn't get the records in the stores, so they'd push the singles out to radio,
right? And
there were no records to buy anywhere.
That's weird.
And so they just completely tanked.
Create demand, but don't fill it. That's smart.
Right. Yeah, so they kind of got screwed. But, so nobody knew who Big Star was until they started remastering this stuff for CD and then later for digital streaming. Yeah. And now they've kind of had a renaissance, decades after they
that's cool.
Stopped being a band.
Well, I mean, you got great solo artists, too, like the 70s, like Al Green, man, stuff like that. It's just unbelievable music genre. But yeah, man, so today we're going to talk about knee pain.
About knee pain, yeah.
And we see a lot of knee pain because we're humans, we're bipedal, we stand upright on our hind 2 feet. And so our knees hurt, just like our back hurts. They're weight-bearing joints. And a doctor friend and I were having lunch yesterday, and he said, he's an orthopedist, and he said, I now think, looking back on my lifetime, that being a younger athlete, he was a judo fighter, he was unbelievable black belt in judo, he was a good athlete growing up, mostly endurance athlete, but he said, now I'm thinking that maybe it's just good to be marginally athletic and reasonably healthy until you're about 40, and then you start doing things. So you save your articular cartilage and you save your joints until you get older to live your life. Because older athletes, a lot of times, I mean, look at older NBA athletes. They get up out of a chair and it's a slow climb.
Oh gosh, have you seen Magic Johnson? They stopped doing this, but it used to be on SportsCenter. They'd make him get up and point at the screen from time to time. And it was hard to watch him.
Well, their
stumble
knees
around.
are just their knees and ankles and hips are just trashed. You know, mostly their hips and knees are trashed.
I think they realize that, and they just let them sit behind the desk now. But
yeah. And one thing we need to talk about today, and it's hard to talk about. I'm sure we're going to do other podcasts about specific knee injuries and specific rehabilitation or training models for that type of knee injury, because just like with low back pain, just like with shoulder pain, just like with knee pain or any joint, all injuries or pathologies are not equal. We have to determine what is the root cause of the pain generator, or what is the root cause of maybe dysfunctional movement or lack of strength or whatever the problem is. It could be bony issues. It could be joint cartilage, surfacing issues. It could be contractile elements like tendons, muscular elements, and then it also could be non-contractile, like joint stability issues with ligaments and joint capsules. And then also, last but not least, it could be neurological. In other words, you could have a nerve injury that's causing a lack of muscular activation around a joint, and so you just can't use the joint. I've got a client right now, she's got some low back pain, and she's got some nerve root involvement in the left leg. And so she's got some motor weakness. In other words, she's got some muscle groups that are weaker now in that leg because there's nerve impaired function. And so those are things that we have to look at. So when we talk about knee pain, I need people to understand it just matters. It just depends.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about some overarching concept, not overreaching. We're going to talk about some overarching concepts today that are more kind of an umbrella concept in regards to what I do with a client, what we do with clients. They come into the gym and want to squat, deadlift, leg press, whatever we're doing, and they have knee pain. Associated with lifting.
And yeah, exactly. And that's one thing I'd like to cover as well, is those that have developed knee pain after lifting, because that's more than likely something that we can solve via form issues, or perhaps, like we've done with the previous episodes, some variant lifts or equipment solutions.
Right.
So,
and I want to preface this podcast by saying this, that my business partner, one of my business partners who's a DPT, she did her DPT thesis or capstone project on knee pain, osteoarthritis, and weightlifting, and the incidences, kind of the stats of that. And does weightlifting, the big question was this: does weightlifting cause osteoarthritis or knee pain in people, and does it cause it at a higher rate than the normal population? And the answer to that question is that there's nothing in the literature that shows, according to her study, and what I've seen in the future, I mean, what I've seen recently, that lifting causes osteoarthritis at a greater incident level than the normal non-lifting or non-exercising population. If anything, the OA rate, or the joint pain rate and joint pain and dysfunctions, are higher in the non-lifting population, and the function is lower.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I mean, what we're basically saying is that people who strength train don't necessarily have, more knee pain than the general population. They don't. And in fact, they have a higher ability to function.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I think I saw some data, this was a couple of years ago, so I couldn't tell you the source anymore, but it was showing that one of the predictors for lower pain for people that suffer from osteoarthritis in the knee was circumference. Well, it was circumference of the leg above the knee. So
Right.
in other words, quadriceps and hamstring thickness, mass, greater strength levels,
Right.
indicated less pain in the knee.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's a lot of things we could discuss here that are overarching concepts. I mean, one of the things we've seen in recent literature is this theory that loading. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about this, because this is, I could talk for hours about this, because they're a fairly complicated subject when you talk about knees. So remember, in the knee, we have really four main bones indicated in knee movement. Okay, the femur, which is the long bone of your thigh, the tibia, which is the weight-bearing bone, the shank, your lower limb, your shin, the fibula, which is a non-weight-bearing bone, but it sits right next to the tibia. It's a smaller bone. And then also the patella, which is what we would call the kneecap. Okay, so we got those four main bones in knee function. Now, it's important to understand that within the knee, we have lots of different structural elements. We have muscles that move the knee. We have tendons that tie muscle to bone. We have ligaments that hold the knee together passively. In other words, the ligaments keep the knee all together without any active intervention from the human themselves, from them actually contracting a muscle to stabilize
stability,
it. Right,
basically.
it's passive, like we've talked about. It's inert, passive, non-contractile stability. So we've got ligaments. And then we've also got the skin that covers it. We've got fascia, we've got nerves and arteries and veins, capillaries. But then down inside the joint, the bones have a protective covering over them, and it's a thin protective covering, and it's made out of what we call articular cartilage. Okay, it's cartilage that's within inside the joint, and there's also what we call hyaline cartilage. Okay, in the joint we have what are called menisci or meniscus. There's two of them. There's a medial and lateral meniscus, and those meniscus sit on top of the articular cartilage of the joint. Okay, the cartilage that covers the tibia. Okay, because the meniscus attached to the tibia, and the medial and lateral condyles of the femur sit down in those fossas or scooped out areas that are created. And the reason why we call them meniscus is because they look like the meniscus in a glass of water, basically. They kind of look where water will hold on to the edge of the glasses.
Because slightly curved surface.
Yeah, because of friction and because of the surfactant of it. And so that's why we call them the meniscus, because they're shaped like a menisci. But all of the cartilage elements are very avascular and aneural, meaning this: you don't really feel them very much because they don't have much nervous supply and innervation, and you don't really feed them blood or get blood back out of them, arteries and veins, because they're somewhat avascular. They don't have a lot of blood supply. So that means they're organic structures that sit in there and only have a certain life. In other words, if you tear cartilage, whether you tear a meniscus or you tear cartilage on the surface of the bone, okay, that cartilage is not going to heal very well because it doesn't have reproductive properties or self-healing properties. Now, there is also a fluid that's within the joint that helps to lubricate the whole joint. And that's called synovial fluid.
Right.
And that fluid is produced by aligning the interior lining of the capsule, which is called the synovial lining. Now we know, more than we ever did, that movement of the joint and also loading of the joint helps to do two things. Number one, it helps to produce more fluid for lubrication, because lubrication is everything. And number two, it helps to improve the viscoelastic properties of the cartilage.
Yeah.
Okay? So it helps to keep the cartilage healthy and thicker by loading it. We also know that cartilage can actually atrophy or thin naturally because lack of use. And the last thing we know about the properties of these two structures, the cartilage and the fluid of the joint, is that when you load the joint and the fluid gets squeezed and it gets under pressure, it has the opposite effect to the fluid that normal fluid viscosity has with all other fluids that we see generally in the world.
Sure. Yeah, right.
When you load a fluid, usually with a lot of friction and a lot of pressure, it breaks the viscosity of it down. It thins it.
Yeah.
But in the knee joint, when you load the fluid, it has the opposite of the Newtonian type. It's opposite in the Newtonian effect, and that is it thickens. So the more you load it, the more it thickens. So it is opposite of the normal Newtonian effect of fluid dynamics.
That's really interesting, because I was just thinking.
There's a lot of science.
We talk about the importance of kind of quote unquote warming up the joints
right.
through movement and warm ups, and we know that it feels good when your joints are warm, and that's why we put knee sleeves on. That's why we squat light empty bar sets first, and so on.
Yeah,
and I always thought, maybe that was decreasing the viscosity of the synovial fluid and allowing it to flow better across the joint. But that you're saying that's in fact the opposite is happening. As we start to load it, it's increasing in thickness, and I guess
over time
supporting the tissue more.
Right. It's lubricating the tissue, and over time, the other thing that we know is it's firing some proprioceptive sensors in the joint and some chemicals in the joint which make the joint feel better. So as the joint warms up, the joint gets more heat in it. The joint gets more fluid flowing over the joint. The joint just moves better.
So it's really that feeling of heat in the joint feels good, maybe for proprioceptive reasons, not necessarily from a mechanical reason.
I think both.
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. But I think the important overarching concept here is basically this. Exercise and loading is good for your knees.
Yeah.
If you have bad knees, you better be exercising. Number one, you need strength around the knees to improve their function. And number two, that helps you to function in real life overall because the individual joint function helps your overall composite function in daily living. And number three, it's actually more healthy for your joints.
Yeah.
So here's another interesting point. Runners do not have a higher osteoarthritis incidence than non-runners do. A lot of people think, well, running tears up your knees. Well, look at a normal 60-year-old who doesn't exercise at all. Look at their function and the arthritis rates and knee pain rates in that population, and look at runners who are 60. The runners actually have a lower pain scoring and better function. So now, does that mean that some sports and some athletic endeavors don't traumatize knee joints when done at a very high capacity or done for very long periods of time? And you can get a lot of wear and tear on joints. You can tear meniscus, you can tear, articular cartilage, hyaline cartilage. You can wear down the cartilage in your knees to the point to where then it becomes painful. One thing to remember here is basically this. When you're damaging the cartilage, you may not feel it a lot. You may get a little bit of stiffness, maybe a little bit of fullness feeling in the joint, like it feels a little tight from a little inflammatory condition, but no major pain. Once you tear the cartilage, the surfacing of the cartilage in the joint enough to where it exposes the subchondral bone or the cartilage that attaches directly into the bone, that's where the nerve endings are. That's where the pain starts. That's where your knee aches.
"Quote unquote" bone on bone feeling.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and that's even farther, but that's where the knee pain starts. Okay. And that's where the discomfort is. Now, not to say that by that time, the damage has been done, but in some ways it has.
Sure, yeah.
But we can strength train those knees.
Yeah, and so I wanted to go to that next. We've been talking about these passive structures in the knee that support the knee, but we also have some major muscle groups that support the knee. And it just made me think of something I saw, and I think I've heard Ripito talk about, is so my sister-in-law played high school soccer, right? And she had some friends. She had a couple friends who actually went on to play Division I soccer at the NCAA level. And all of them had ACL tears, except my sister-in-law did not. But the other friends.
It's very common in female athletes.
And what I remember is very interesting. If you look at high school and college soccer athletes, this is maybe just anecdotal, but I observed that a lot of them had very well-developed quadriceps, underdeveloped hamstrings.
Correct.
To the naked eye, that's what I saw.
And your observation is consistent with the literature in the medical community now. The the sports medicine literature says basically this. Females who have lots of anterior knee pain, maybe patellofemoral pain in the back of the kneecap, where the cartilage is worn or the kneecap is not tracking right, so it wears on one side more than the other, or they have ACL injuries or instability issues due to ACL looseness. They get an ACL that's been torn or sprained and there's some slack or laxity in the joint. They have weak hips, a weak posterior chain. So our primary treatment model in the clinic today for women that have anterior or young female athletes that have anterior knee pain, our primary treatment model is to build the glutes, build the abductors, build the hips, build the low back, and the hamstrings.
Yeah, and that was my hypothesis is these ladies probably are not squatting and deadlifting in the gym in the off season.
No, none of them are. And the athletes that are don't have the incident rate of injuries that female athletes that don't strength train. Volleyball athletes are a great example. I mean, you watch volleyball, young athletes, they're usually really tall females, long femurs, short trunks.
Right.
That makes a good volleyball player.
Yeah.
They have really good leaping capacity or vertical leap capacity. But what happens is they land on the ground and their knees go into valgus. Their knees go into a knock-knee position.
Baby deer.
And that's that's because of hip weakness.
Yeah.
And so then they get patellofemoral problems. That also puts an increased torsional, rotational stress, which then eventually tears the ACL sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for ACL tears, but that's one of the mechanisms.
So why do I bring that up? We have these big muscle groups that we train with the barbell lifts.
We need to train them.
And they provide active support for the knee. So in that example, we were talking about these ladies that have this overdeveloped quadriceps and underdeveloped posterior chain, hamstrings and glutes.
Right.
Well, it's relevant because when we think about the bottom of a squat, let's say, you can see how in a proper squat that's executed to depth,
right,
that's not high, the quadriceps are extended.
Right.
The hamstrings are extended, and essentially they provide, opposite forces across the knee. Co-contraction. Yeah.
We call that the agonist-antagonist relationship, and it's co-contraction stability at the joint. It's compound movement, and it's the best type of training to do based on not only the literature today, all the newer literature we have, but also observational and anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
So the big lifts, the compound lifts, are great to take a joint that's not functioning right, that's painful, and try to get it back into better function with appropriate forces in the joint to take stress off hot spots in the joint where there's pain being generated.
Yeah, I think about these athletes that are sprinting. In soccer, you're sprinting hard for the ball, so you've got to accelerate your body mass, sprint, and then decelerate your body mass very quickly. And you're placing a lot of shearing force across the knee that needs to be counteracted by your hamstrings. So if you have to have strong hamstrings to slow your body and decelerate and make a change of direction.
Right.
Now, that's a sport. In everyday life, I think about the same thing happens at a lower intensity level.
Right.
We're walking up inclines, we're walking down inclines, hiking up and down a mountain. The same thing is at play here. You have to have strong quadriceps and hamstrings and glutes in order to keep that knee stable during everyday movement.
Right.
And so if you have a deficiency in strength, that's where these barbell lifts can really help to fix that.
Right. The hardest thing to convince a client that has knee pain already when they come in to train is that lifting and training and squatting and deadlifting and leg pressing will make their knees feel better. Because there is some breaking in time there. There is
maybe some pain involved in the process.
Right. There's a little bit of acclimatization to the process. And so they've got to start moving those knees and using those knees to make them feel better. Now, there are clients too, and I'll just be frankly honest with our audience. There are clients where there's been too much damage done to the articular cartilage. I mean, the knees are crap. The knees are in a terrible condition, and they need a total knee replacement. Total knee replacements reduce people's pain and improve their function when their knees are crap.
Yeah.
I mean, period. I tell patients that have really bad osteoarthritis, hey, your knee is bad enough that if you were my parent or you were me, I would say get a knee replacement. Now, there's lots of things to think about. Metal in your body, having, an allergic response to that.
How long do they last?
All that. Yeah. Longevity of the knees, all those things,
Sure.
Making sure that you have the right total joint replacement selection for the kind of activity you want to have after you have your joint replacement done. But by and large, when you got crappy knees and they don't respond well to really good coaching and strength training or other activities like cycling or swimming, and you still have knee pain, guess what? You probably need to have a knee replacement. Sorry to hear that. I don't care if you're 50 or 45, it just is what it is. But when we get that client that comes in and they want to strength train, the thing I like about what we're coaching and how we're coaching is that all of the lifts that we use, all the accessory exercises and assistive exercises, they work a co-contraction equally around the knee joint, but they don't necessarily emphasize one muscle group over another. Now, there are times where, a good example would be a Romanian deadlift is really highly focusing on the posterior chain. the hamstrings, the glutes, the hip extensors, the extensors of the hip and the flexors of the knee.
Right.
But it's still working your quads. It's still working your quads.
Sure, they're not
and
passive.
your hip flexors, and so it's important to recognize that there are some exercises that are selected that are a little bit more leaning towards one muscle group or another. But what I really like about the way we teach the squat in a low bar position, the way it gets the weight over the hip and out of the knees. I have clients. The client that I have that came from Georgia recently, low back surgery, bad knee pain, osteoarthritis in the left knee, squatted with me. We went through a barbell startup session. She said she had virtually no knee pain. And in the past, when she had been taught to squat, she had nothing but knee pain. It's the way we do it.
That's right. That's right. So, in what you're referring to is, what we call the squat, capital S.
That's right.
Is what other people refer to as a low bar back squat.
Right.
And as we've mentioned before in the technique episodes, in the physics episodes, when you move that bar down on your back, you essentially all your joints have to bend to some degree to get down to depth in squat. It's just how much are we asking one joint to bend versus another? And in this case, we're asking the hips to flex more, to close more, and the knees, therefore,
stays a little more
open. As you reach back, the knee stays more open. So we're asking less of the knee in terms of flexion or just closing at the bottom of the squat, and that seems to be helpful for those that have a lot of knee pain. You think about the opposite extreme of that would be a front squat. Where you carry the bar in front of you, and it just by the nature of the lift, in order to stay balanced in the lift, your knees have to come way forward.
And you're very vertical.
Very closed. Mm-hmm. The hips are much more open. So we're just playing around with angles, selecting that low bar squat in order to put more of the moment force on the hips and the back as opposed to the knee. And
we could have a ton of discussion on the difference between the high bar back squat, what's traditionally taught, and the low bar position. There's a lot of experts on the interwebs and gurus, and there's a lot of studies and everything else, and there is some rationale to the fact that if you high bar back squat and you have a more closed knee angle and you get to the bottom, people would say, well, there's more stress on the knees. Yes, but you're also still putting a lot of stress on the hips and the low back. The problem that I have with that model of squat is that a lot of times people will squat, ass to grass. They squat way too deep.
Right, yes.
And it causes a momentary lapse or a momentary change in direction where there's a softness there and contraction.
Yeah.
And the knees get greater forces on them because they valgus or varus too much, and there's lateral and rotational movement in the knees that doesn't normally occur with the low bar position. The second thing that I have a problem with is that when you get to the very bottom of the squat, people will say, well, there's really not much contact on the knee surfaces anymore anyway, so there's not as much load. I'm like, no, the surface area is smaller. With a greater force production out of the bottom to try to transition, change direction and movement, now you have a smaller surface area to produce the same amount of force with the knee more closed than the knee more open. So from a force production standpoint, it's the same amount of force, but it's a greater interior knee force because there's the same force being produced in a smaller surface area.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So if I follow you, then you're saying that because of that,
right,
if you're trying to keep the knee angle really open and you've got someone that has this cartilage, worn cartilage, right where there's
more contact surface area.
Yeah, we want more contact surface area in that case to spread that load as opposed to less. So we want to keep the knee more open in that case.
That's right.
So we want
to put the load on the bigger joint.
Yeah.
And the bigger joint is the hip.
Yeah, it's like
the hip is a ball and socket. Yeah. The knee is not.
Do you want to support this big heavy weight on a little tiny spike,
right,
or on a big flat?
Well,
surface?
you know how I tell patients this all the time is I'll walk up to them and I'll say, "All right, I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to push like on your arm, and I'm going to take just a certain amount of force and push through my fingertip on your arm. Tell me how that feels." And they're like, "Oh, that kind of hurts a little bit." I say, "Now I'm going to take that same force and I'm going to do it through my fist." And I put the same amount of force through my fist. And like, well, that doesn't hurt at all. I'm like, it's the same force, but one is spread out over a larger surface area, and the other one is the same force directed at a more focused point.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Hurts more.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So same concept when we're squatting. We want that weight bearing to occur over a larger surface area, a larger distribution. So let's talk about what we do with the client when they come in, they want to strength train, they want to get stronger, but they do have some knee pain. First thing I have to kind of decide is, and I do this because of my clinical background, why are their knees hurting?
Right.
If you're a traditional strength coach, you might not have that opportunity to do that. And so you just start squatting them, deadlifting them, leg pressing them, whatever you do. I try to evaluate what is the pain generator of that knee pain. Is it tendon? Is it ligament? Is it joint cartilage? Or is it muscular? And so we look and see what's going on there.
Yeah, we can even if you don't have that medical background, we can use the movements and use the process to discover what ranges of motion are more painful than others,
right?
What types of movements are more painful than others, and then work from there.
Right. But I do not modify the model to get them started in a barbell startup program just because they report that they have knee pain.
Right.
I go ahead and apply the model using the squat that we like to use, which is the squat, like we've talked about. Deadlifting them, pressing them, bench pressing them, and if appropriate, chins or power cleans or whatever we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I see how they adapt to it. 9 times out of 10, their knee pain gets better as we train along, as we move through the progression,
right?
As we get them stronger. Now, if we're progressing them through their novice linear progression, and they have some knee pain when they squat 3 days a week, I might, and I just might, it's based on each individual case, shift them to the leg press because I find with the leg press, I can actually keep the knee even more open if I want to and get the same range of motion. But I don't want them to do, I try not to just have them leg press only, unless they're just crazy weak. And then I start them on the leg press and then we move them to the squat.
Yeah, because we still want to train that posterior chain.
Right.
And the leg press is not going to do that as effectively as a squat or a deadlift. Right. Yeah, I would think if somebody, one of my go-tos, especially for my older guys that have issues squatting 3 times a week for other reasons too, not just knee pain, back pain, whatever. I really like driving the deadlift and maybe doing a little bit more volume in the deadlift instead. Yeah. Because it doesn't require as much.
Keeps the knee fairly open.
Doesn't require as much knee flexion, and it's still training that posterior chain and bringing stability to the joint.
I do the exact same thing. If squatting 3 days a week is too painful for the older client because their knees are kind of crunchy and junky, then we'll squat 2 days a week. We'll still use the linear progression model. And then on the day in the middle or wherever we're going to put that, I'll do some other posterior chain accessory or assistive exercise.
And that could
like Romanian deadlifts, good mornings, whatever. But I could do hip bridges, bench hip bridges. I could do another exercise called the Nordic hamstring curls, which I like those to develop the posterior chain.
Right.
So it's really good eccentric training on the hamstrings.
And don't forget, you can just use more deadlifts. So especially early on in the novice progression, when we haven't introduced a lot of accessories yet, I'll stick with maybe, let's say you can't deadlift heavy every session anymore. So it might go heavy deadlift Monday, light deadlift Wednesday, and a light deadlift would be something like 2 sets of 5.
Yeah. A little bit more volume.
At like 80% of what you did on Monday, and then again heavy deadlift on Friday. And I like that too, especially if they're still new to the technique, because that allows you to really get confident and build good technique.
Absolutely.
And that extra volume helps.
So a little bit of variance. You're still driving leg and hip development. The key focus here is focus on the hip. Focus on the hip, the hip, the hip, the hip, the hip, the hippity hip, the hip hop. Is that
it's all in the hips.
It's all in the hips, man. Focus on the hip because the hip is what's going to drive a healthier knee. And that's so important to realize. So many people, for years, we did long arc quads and we did knee extensions on knee extensions machines. Now we know that's not good for your knees. It's better to do compound functional movement. And so I focus on the hip. So I even will add step-ups to them and lateral step-ups and forward step-ups. And I'll do split squats with them sometimes. And so we'll do these variant exercises, these accessory exercises, because it helps us get work in the knee joint around the hip.
Yeah.
So the hip is the key driver to knee health.
We could say in general that you want to look for any lift that is going to keep the knee angle more open and is primarily using the hips as the prime movement.
Yeah, and I think
that covers a lot of stuff. But again, as we've said elsewhere, you want to look at stuff that's most closely related to the big compound lifts first.
Right.
So squats and deadlifts, and then look at their variance first. And then down the line, as you need more volume, but not necessarily more load,
right.
you can look at those secondary movements like the bridges and the split squats and lunges.
And I might use those from a strength rehabilitation process on the front end with clients that have real problematic knees.
Sure.
But it's important to recognize, too, that we do that. I do that based on the pathology, based on what I think's going on in the knee joint.
Yeah, some of your patients may not be ready to squat or deadlift at all yet. They've got some work to do before they're ready for that.
Especially if they're really, really weak, and they can't do a good, stable squat. Deadlift, most of them can deadlift. I might say 99.9% of all patients and strength clients can deadlift day one.
Yeah.
And if they can't, we rack pull them. We pull them a little high if we need to. But I want to try to vary the process of starting someone on barbell strength training as minimal as possible because I just don't know. And many times they will adapt.
Right.
And they just haven't been given the opportunity to adapt before someone gives them this special program. You don't have to have a lot of knowledge about knee pain to train someone who has knee pain. So you can apply the model and see what the adaptation to that model is and then vary it based on that. Now, we're really simplifying this because there are a lot of changes that we can make to someone's strength programming and training when it comes to exercise selection, volume, intensity, the type of programming that we do with them when there are particular structures indicated. Like if someone's got patellar tendonitis, there's a specific way that we can treat that. I don't necessarily lighten the loads with them. Sometimes I'll decrease the volume some in the heavier loads, but I still want a heavy load on them so that I can produce a hypertrophic or growth response and an adaptation response in the tendon. We used to think that when we had bad tendonitis that all we did was higher volume, lower load stuff and a lot of eccentric training. Well, we still like eccentric training, negatives under load, basically, a lengthening of the muscle and tendon under load to train the tendon. But I also like a set or two of heavier loads, much lower volume, but still kind of heavier loads based on the pain threshold to get that tendon to adapt and grow and thicken. I want it to thicken. I want it to have a response.
And it makes sense, too, from a technique standpoint. You're talking about patellar tendonitis. We often see that with someone, if that's a new pain or something that's onset
during training. A lot of times it's just a form issue.
It's a form issue. We call it knee slide, where we observe the knee to continually slide forward. Or maybe there's valgus where it caves in during the squat. And often I'll notice that will set in on a heavy set of 5 on reps 4 and 5. Yeah. As the lifter fatigues, it's harder to mentally focus and your forms break down. So in that case, I like to keep the weight high, but maybe go to 3s or maybe even doubles.
Right.
Because you can execute the technique much more cleanly for 2 or 3 good reps. I'd rather have 2 or 3 A quality reps versus a 4 and 5 that's kind of a B minus.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're doing that observationally and anecdotally. You're doing that because you're saying, I want to improve the form, which can be a driver of injury.
Right.
Poor form can be a driver of injury. And also, what you're doing, and you don't recognize that you're doing, well, you do because you and I have talked about it, but what most coaches don't recognize that they're doing too is they're still keeping load on the area and allowing the tendon to have an adaptive response to that, which is good.
Yeah.
Patients want to go light when their joints hurt, and that's not necessarily the path that they need to be taking. Lubrication in the tendon is important. Getting that tendon sheath to slide and glide is important. So we do want movement in it, but we do need to load that tendon to get it to strengthen, to adapt, because it will thicken. Yeah. There's a thickening process, a hypertrophic process that occurs when we load tendons during strength training. So we want that.
Absolutely.
And to take that away from the client during the rehabilitation process is counterintuitive. It doesn't work.
Yeah. So I give you just a really quick anecdotal story. I have been LPing my squat after a strength meet that I did in June. And I took some time off from doing low bar back squats to front squat and to do some other just kind of accessory work. I just needed a mental break from the barbell for a little while. So for the last few weeks, I've been LPing my back squat, my low bar back squat, up from 275, and I've been working it up. I wanted to work it up into the mid threes again, which is a decent working weight for 3 sets of 5 for me. And I got to 335 for 3 sets of 5, and I observed a little bit of knee slide start to creep up in my form, where my knees are sliding forward at the bottom of the lift. And I had a terrible case of patellar tendonitis pop up seemingly overnight. And it was just killing me for about 5 or 6 days. And so what I did is I did lower the weight, but I did it to correct the form issue. So I lowered it down to 275, and I did 5 sets of 3 for my next workout, checking my video to ensure that I have very good technique. I'm getting my knees set early, not allowing them to slide forward in the bottom of the lift. They come forward the first third of the squat. On the way down, they freeze in space, and I get back in my hips, keep the bar over the midfoot. And so by doing that, 5 sets of 3, I was able to fix the technique and start to resolve some of the pain issues I was having. Sure. And now I'm starting to build it back up. So I did lower the weight to address the form issue, but it's still within, I'd say 70 to 80% of what my normal working loads would be. So that's a good example. If you've been training for a while and you have new knee pain that comes on, that's a reasonable move to make. And that's still, with 275 on my back, that's still a decent amount of load to help the tendons, do their thing and heal up.
Yeah, and also don't do this. Strength training's hurting my knees.
Right. Yeah.
Don't
complain.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
It's 9 times out of 10 a form or a programming issue. Could be overtraining too. I'll give you a great example that's not too dissimilar from Coach Trent's. I wanted to do some volume work and build the size of my legs a little bit more. So I was doing 10s and eventually went up to 12s, and I was doing 8s and 10s and 12s, and my knee tendons, my patellar tendons started bothering me. I was just overtraining a little bit.
Yeah.
I hadn't been used to doing that kind of volume with that kind of load. And I was doing 3 sets of 10 with 315.
Yeah.
So it was a good size load. And so what I had to do was just back off. I had to back off. So it's not squatting that's hurting your knees normally. Now, again, like we talked about, we're talking about kind of a patellar tendonitis issue here. But let's say you have an articular cartilage issue. Let's say you just have crap for cartilage in your knees. Your knee cartilage is thinning. You've got some exposure to painful elements in your knees. We do want you to squat. I might also use the leg press with you too. But the key here is that there does come a point on some occasions where the knees are you need something done medically. You need to have some medical intervention, maybe a knee replacement. Am I a big believer in stem cells? Not so much yet. The literature is very scant on stem cells. And one overarching principle that you need to understand here is if you have very little cartilage in your joints, what are stem cells going to help you grow?
Right. Yeah.
The idea behind stem cells is if you have a hole in your cartilage or maybe like a little crater or something, there's some surrounding healthier cartilage, then you drop some stem cells down into that hole and it attaches onto the naturally occurring cartilage that's there, and it tries to kind of reproduce or fill in that hole with a cartilage-like tissue. But that's only if you have some of those remaining cells left there. And if you have just a bald medial femoral condyle, you just have bad osteoarthritis, they can put stem cells all they want to in there, but you just don't have enough naturally occurring cells to improve the quality of that knee joint surfacing. So you're better off, I hate to say this, but getting a knee replacement until we develop better technology. And so, but I want you to squat. I want you to lift, and we will work the programming around that. Trent made a perfect point, though, is that if you have no knee pain before you came to train, and now you have some knee pain, be a little bit more self-aware, and have your coach look at, or you look at through video review, how you're lifting, what you're doing. Trent also, and he recognized that he took too big of jumps too.
Yeah. So I had LP'd from, I think I went 275, 295, 315. No, actually, I went 275, 315, 335. Bam.
Yeah, it's a
There it
pretty big
goes.
jump.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I probably should have gone 275, 295, 315,
Follow the program.
325, right?
Right, YNDTP.
Yeah,
Not doing
exactly.
program.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
on me.
I mean, sometimes we can do that if we have a slight deload and we come back to train. We can ramp it back up more quickly, but the principles are pretty the same here. Follow the program, check your form, fix your form, make sure that you're training with the right volume and intensity. Recognize when you might have some junky knees, you might have a little bit of knee wear and tear, and sometimes I find that if squatting 3 days a week just kills your knees and you've tried a variance in programming and volume and intensity, you've tried backing off and doing a really light day, let's say maybe 60, 70, 75%, you're still having knee pain, try taking that one day then and just squatting 2 times a week and doing something that's a little lower load but still promotes movement in the joint, like maybe some swimming or some cycling, some stationary cycling, some recumbent cycling, something like that, where you're still getting movement in the joint and you're still getting that good lubrication of the joint and health of the tissues, but it's not as much of a load. That's not to say, when I'm hesitant to tell people that though, because they say, oh, well, not loading the joints must be better. No, what I'm saying is that sometimes it makes sense to use some other forms of exercise intervention and exercise selection when the joints need a little rest from loading. You know, everybody wants to do this. They basically want to say, if a little's good, a lot is better. That's not necessarily true. There, again, we talk about these concepts in 40 Fit. There is a sweet spot here where training just enough and having a reasonably strong body will give you better quality of life with better longevity.
Yep, right.
And that's the key.
And we're all about training for life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not training for utter maximal performance at all costs.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Like I tell a powerlifting client or a strength lifting client, you know, if you're going to push your body as hard as you're going to push your body, you may tip the scale between health and fitness.
Yeah.
You may be crazy fit, but you're not very healthy, or you're less healthy. You've had less joint health. I mean, look at a professional athlete. There's a point in their life where they are crazy fit. They're freaks of nature, genetic freaks of nature. But a little later in life, they've used up a lot of that genetic life.
They're like
a lot of that
didn't you compare it
joint
to like a dragster? You know, it goes 1,000 miles an hour, but then at the end of the track, it's done. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at race
thing.
cars. I mean, they go thugh an engine every race, I think, or something like that. How many sets of tires do they go through? It's got crazy capacity, but it uses up its capacity.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with strength training, with fitness endeavors. Remember that we don't want to go 90 miles an hour all the time. Okay. That's one of the beefs I have with CrossFit, you know, and the way it's programmed in a lot of gyms is it's always high intensity interval training. It's always high intensity. There's not enough variance in having days to where you just do a lot less and you sweat a lot less too. So you might not necessarily feel, in air quotes, like you're working out as much, but you are, because that's part of the process.
That's right. That's right.
It's part of the overall overarching process.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk really quick. Let's touch on equipment, because there are some things we can do that make knees feel better.
Oh, absolutely.
So one thing, I don't squat without my knee sleeves
I
anymore.
love my knee sleeves.
I mean, I could, but I don't want to.
I love them, man.
So I recommend everyone get a good pair of knee sleeves, and this is where you want to spend some money.
Absolutely.
Don't get the cheapo ones. You want, I think the best ones
you
that
and
I've
I
seen.
both agree.
It's either there's basically two options in my mind. You've got the SBD.
Yep.
SBD knee sleeves. They only sell one kind. It's a 7mm thick neoprene knee sleeve.
I love
it's
them.
Great. Ray-Band,
Yep.
REH band,
Yep.
makes another one. Now they make several versions. So
Right,
you want
several
the original one, which
Right.
is the blue 7mm thick one.
I've got a pair of those too. That's what I started with.
Those are like the classic strongman. You see all the strongman guys. They'll wear the knee sleeves on their elbows.
Yeah,
they're-
here's their elbows.
they're
So
massive.
big, freaking big.
But you want the thick, high quality ones, and those, man, they just make your knees feel warm.
Man, I love
They
knee
give
sleeves.
you a little bit of cushion at the bottom of the lift.
Compression?
Compression.
Yeah. You want to make a knee feel good, you give it compression, a little bit of increase in temperature, better lubrication. Lubrication is everything.
And motion is
And
lotion.
motion's yeah, exactly. So we want to give that joint some support. My general rule of thumb is I warm up 2 sets with the bar, a set of 35 for 5, a set of 225 at 3. Then my knee sleeves go on when I get to 275.
Yep,
At 275, my knee sleeves go on. And then I use my knee sleeves to squat from there forward.
Yep,
So, and I squat
thing.
in SBDs. That's not we're not sponsored by SBD, but I love their knee sleeves.
They're high quality. So I think it's about $80 for a pair. So it's not going to blow the bank, but it's totally worth it. Now I haven't done this, but the knee wraps. I've heard some people a knee wrap, especially if you have some ligament injuries.
Yeah, sure.
And you don't have much stability in your
tied
knee.
around the patella.
And that would be like a thick, like you've seen powerlifters do this maybe, where they've got it's almost like a very thick, stiff ace bandage. And you just wrap it around the knee. Now that is going to provide some direct, very stiff compression
based on how tight you wrap them.
Right, yeah.
But
and the stiffness
it takes
of the
a little
wrap.
bit more skill level to wrap knees and make sure that you're wrapping them correctly and everything. But knee wraps can be great too.
That could be really helpful if you've got,
you're
knees
lifting heavier.
Yeah, and you've got some really, some unstable knees. So
I would say that 9 out of 10 gym clients can get some really good sleeves, and they will be more than adequate, and you will feel more than good with your knees. And my knees are a little junky. I mean, mine are crunchy. I mean, you can hear my knees from across the room when I'm squatting or leg pressing. You can hear my knees. They're noisy, but it is what it is, right? I have a choice. I can have noisy, uncomfortable knees, or I can have noisy, more painful knees that are weak. I can have those that are strong and those that are weak. So I choose to have those that are strong. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what about orthotics? I don't want to open a can of worms here, but some people that have low arches or maybe flat feet, if they haven't gotten that checked out, should they be looking at orthotics or maybe just getting an opinion?
I wouldn't do anything unless a problem arises.
Okay.
Unless I saw a significant alignment issue that I thought was affecting their squat form in being safe, and we couldn't alter that or improve that through an active awareness and making sure they're driving their knees out or whatever.
Okay.
Like we have a client that you were doing remote coaching for, and he came to see me as a patient.
Right.
And one of the challenges was that he had some foot alignment issues that were influencing his knee pain, his medial joint line knee pain. And so we put him in custom orthotics through molding them. These are not off the shelf. I cast them or mold them in the clinic. Then I send them off to a lab that we use, and the lab fabricates the orthotic directly for him. What it did was it helped to align that knee under load better to get some of the load off the medial femoral condyle, off the inside of the knee joint. And I think it's helped him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, in those cases, I do recommend, because there's this kind of statement in the physical therapy world: as the foot hits the ground, everything changes. And that's true. The foot is the primary contact for the load, the weight-bearing surface in those movements. And so if the foot has an altered mechanic, or if the foot has an altered postural position or deviation, then we can influence movement up the chain, the kinetic chain, up into the knee and then up into the hip and into the low back even, by improving the alignment or the posture of the foot.
Okay, yeah. So that's maybe if you've addressed all of the other things we've talked about in this episode, and you have low arches, flat feet, and a possible alignment issue with your feet, maybe go get that checked out and look into some orthotics if that's what your provider recommends.
Right. No, that's good.
Well,
good.
I'd say we are knee deep in it now. So let's crawl out.
Yeah. And we could talk a lot more, and we could maybe do a couple podcasts too on just specific things like, how do we train around patellar tendonitis? What are some of the things we do? How do we train about specifically just knee arthritis?
Fixing knee slide is a technique episode.
We could do that
one.
too. So. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'll talk about knee pain and programming and strength training. Thanks for joining the 40Fit Nation. You can reach out to us through email, info@40fit.com, at 40Fit Radio on Instagram. Trent's at Marmalade Cream. I'm at Dr. Deaton. And you can go to our Facebook page, the 40Fit Nation Facebook group. Man, we love having you guys on the podcast. Keep commenting, keep sending us suggestions. And thanks for being with us today. And get those healthy knees by getting them strong. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.